Welcome to Top 14 Square. It's December 22nd, 2025. We're talking about the German parliamentary election. And, well, we got new numbers, new polls. We will talk about it. But first, so that you're aware of it, we are 63 days away from election day in Germany. So, where are we? Well, we can see some movements in the election polls. So, first of all, the Union or the CDU CSU is gaining some points in the polls. Just a reminder, these are the polls that I get from e.g. Forcer, Mnet, whatever you go, all the different ones that I put together, and I'm following them. And here we can see there's a little uptick for the CDU CSU, also an uptick for the AFD, and also for the SPD, and also for the BSW. Also, and this is some sign of hope for the FDP. The FDP is also gaining some point, could be above the 5% threshold. Losing today, or at least in this period, are the Greens and the left. So let's see what the aggregated polls say. So the most recent aggregated poll from December 21, 2024 says, at the moment, CDU, CSU 32%, 15.8% for the SPD, 4%, and so not in the Bundestag, the German parliament, is the FDP, 12.9% the Greens, 2.9% also not in parliament is Die Linke or the left. Then also second strongest opposition party at the moment would be the AFD, 18.9%, 6.0% for the BSW, Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht or Alliance Sarah Wagenknecht, and others, and so not in parliament, 7.5%. What does it look in comparison to the last time? So you can see the Union lost some points in comparison to last week, 0.4%. Then the SPD gained only 0.1%. FDP unchanged. The Greens lost 0.1%. Also the left, they lost 0.4%. The AFD gained a percent. Then we can also see free voters, though not relevant, only in the south most of the time, lost a percentage point or basis point, and then we can see Alliance Sarah Wagenknecht gained 0.1%. Others lost as well. So, today we want to talk about some demographics. It's a wonderful topic, and we want to see first who is voting for whom, men and women. And if we compare these data from the last state and federal election, then we can see that, well, the AFD seems to be a party that is most appealing to male voters, while the Greens, in most of the cases, are the one who is mostly attractive or appealing to female voters. We can see statistically lower values that are leaning towards male voters for the AFD, regardless where they are, in the west, in the north, in the east, and in the south. Everywhere there are more male voters for the AFD. But you can also see, if you look at the column for the FDP, that the FDP is also, well, leaning towards male, but not that much like the AFD. And also, if you thought that left politics are more appealing to female voters, well, if you look at the linker, then you can see that in the West and in the South, more male voters are voting for the left than the female voters. Um, Even the union, the CDU-CSU, has a slight leaning, even though not much, that is going towards women. Same with the SPD. Both are on the same level, and the East is the most female part or group of union voters in the East. So this is what we can see here. We can also see that the East is may be one of the more extreme for all parties. This is most likely because of the history and what you can see, for example, that well, the East is the most female voting group for the FDP, same for the left, and same for the Union. It's the least female voting group for the Greens. Oh, and by the way, it's also the most female voting group for the AFD. But this, in that case, could speak for that the AFD is more in the mainstream in the East. Yeah, and then we want to go on with H. H is also very important. And here we can talk about some cliches, prejudices, and they can see that, for example, the Union, which is from time to time called a Rotary Party, well, they have indeed everywhere the oldest voters, at least in the statistic how we calculated it. If you can see it in the bottom, at the bottom, then we can see that there are age groups from 16 to 24, 16 only. If people were allowed to vote at the age of 16, else you can say it's 18. Then we took 21 in the age group of 25 to 34. We took 29.5, 35 to 44. We took 39.5, and so on and so on. For groups older than 70, we took an average of 77. And yeah, thus you can see that still the Union is one of the oldest um, parties based on who is voting for them. Even though we can say that the North is well, the has the youngest voters for the Union, while the East has the oldest voters. And this is also the same for the SPD. It's the same for the left. This could also be an historical issue, because if you don't know, the east of Germany or East Germany has been ruled by communists until the reunification in the early 90s. And then we also have very young, old voters in the East for the AFD. But again, this could be because the AFD goes mainstream, at least when it's about who they are appealing. The youngest voters we can find for the SPD, for example, is in the north, followed by the west. For the FDP, they have generally young voters, like the Greens, like the Linker, or like the AFD. These are mainly young parties. And yeah, the FDP has the youngest voters in the East, but there they are not that relevant, to be honest. Same with the Greens in the East. They are also very young, and they are below 40 years. This is also interesting, that you can see this deviation. And the youngest voters for Die Linke are in the north, also below 40. And well, for the AFD, also it's the north. There you find the youngest voters of the party. The oldest for the FDP, for example, are in the north. The oldest for the Greens are in the south with 46. The oldest for the AFD you find in the east, but we already mentioned it. And now one of the issues here is that we can see the BSW, the Alliance for Sarah Wagenknecht. In the East, where we had 3 elections, state elections, the average age of the voters is 50 years. But nationally, we see it's 48.8. We also had European elections this year, and this is where the number is coming from. So nationally, they are slightly younger. They are more competing with the AfD 47.753, and with the Union, still the leader in Germany, 51.202, and followed by the SPD 15.811. Now, why is it important? If you look at this chart, you can see from 2017 to 2025, this is an estimate by the way, you can see that the number of voters older than 70 is growing from, around 30 million to almost 40 million. At the same time, the number of younger voters, 18 to 20, is going down. By the way, if you want to vote at the German federal election, you must be 18 years or older. This is the reason why here you can see 18 to 20, but at least the number is going down. And though this means that, younger voters here, they don't have that much influence on politics than, for example, the older ones. And you can also see, female voters 70 or older are more important than. Now let's move on to occupation. Here we can say that we have several groups like unemployed, Arbeitslose. We have Arbeiter, which is workers. We have Angestellte, employees. We have Selbstständige, self-employed, and we have retirees, Rentner. So, who is voting for whom? Again, the Union is leading. They are really on top of these of this range, and they are specifically leading in the West, far ahead of, for example, the SPD. The SPD is relatively young. No, not young. Sorry, I'm still at age. No, let's move it around. So, the Union, as you can see, they are more advanced on this range. Looks like more people are, for example, likely self-employed or retirees. The SPD, known as a Workers' Party, you can see here. Well, they are also moving around this value of employees, self-employed, and retirees, specifically in the East. Remember what I said about the history, and here you can see that the SPD is probably appealing older people who grew up in a socialist environment. In comparison, in the West, you can see for the SPD that people are, leaning toward workers and employees, but still over the value of 4. The FDP, often described as a party for self-employed people, goes definitely in this direction, but not as much as you would think. The Union is still more in this favor. This could be, however, the case because you can see that that there are more retirees voting for the Union than the FDP, where you find more self-employed people, and that a value of 4.5 in comparison to 5.5 for retirees has a different drag. Then the Greens, also important and interesting because this party is sometimes being described of a party of those who are earning well. Here you can see that there is a little difference between the East with 3.947 to 4.15 in the South, where we can see the one is leaning towards workers and employees, while the other one is leaning towards self-employed and retirees. Then in comparison, the Linke or left, well, it's definitely more a workers' party and it's leaning toward workers, but not as much as the AFD. They are having a value of 3.423 nationally. It is going definitely around employees and leans toward workers. So um, probably it's possible to say that the AFD is a workers' party, and they are doing this very well, if we describe it this way, in the West with 3.513, and not so well, but this is mainstream again, I guess, 3.76 in the East. And there they are far ahead of the average in other regions of Germany. However, please be aware that, well, some states are not yet included in the data set. This is what we will do over the time. Then we should also look at the population by occupation, by state. And this is what we can also see here. For example, Bavaria, Baden-Württemberg, or Bayern and Baden-Württemberg, you have many Erwerbstätige. Erwerbstätige is employees and workers. There are not many self-employed, but this is generally the case. Germany is not a founder country. You find many workers, you find many employees. But when you go to Saxony, or Saxony-Anhalt, Sachsen-Anhalt, then you can already see an uptick in the number of retirees. You can see the same with Thuringia or Thüringen. Not much in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, but then again in Brandenburg. Brandenburg is also in the east. And there you can see, okay, there are more retirees, and these are probably the one who are voting AFD, and which is why the value in the east for the AFD is so high in comparison to what you've seen before. I just go one slide back so that you can see it again. Oops, not this one. Okay, here you can see it again. Look at the east, the bold number 3.760. 3.760. Okay, and there you can see that this number, this value, is different from what you can see everywhere else with AFD values. And the reason why is probably that, well, you find more retirees, more people who are voting for the AFD, but it's just an assumption. It's no scientific evidence. And if we want to see who the average voter by party is, then you can see at least, okay, Union, SPD. They are more female, leaning more female, even though it's mostly balanced, but there's a little tendency. And both are definitely over 50 years old. Most likely they are employees, but the union is leaning towards self-employed and retiree. The SPD is an employee party, but leaning toward slightly toward self-employed. Then the FDP, they are male, though balanced, leaning stronger towards male, and they are relatively young, 44.7 years old, and well, also an employee party. In comparison to the Greens, they are more leaning towards self-employment and probably retiring, but you can't expect that they are retiree party, because the average age of the voter is 42.9, and well, if we go after gender, then you can see the Greens are also a female party, leaning towards female voters, and this is the difference to, for example, Die Linke. Die Linke is slightly male but very balanced. The voters are 42.7. It's the youngest party, and they definitely have the direction towards employees and workers. Then the AFD, clearly male. The voters are by average 45.3 years old, and also, well, those sometimes balanced, but clearly going towards workers and employees. And as a last one, though relatively new, BSW is mainly male. Maybe Mrs. Wagenknecht is appealing, but the voters are 49.5 years old. We already talked about it in comparison to Union and SPD. And unlike the Linke, where the BSW is an offspring of, well, this party is an employed party and it is leaning towards self-employed and retirees. Based on the age, we can expect that, well, we're talking more about retirees. And, well, on occupation numbers, I want to say the following. Infratest DMAP is providing the data about the occupation of the voters. However, first we must say that these are more descriptive statistics. And unlike, for example, gender or age, the average profession is not reliable, because it's not like self-employment is the next level in your career if you are an employee, and an employee is not the next level if you are a worker. This is why at least this statistic is not reliable. But we must also say that we only get unemployed voters as numbers during the Bundestagswahl, the federal election, but not during the state elections. This is why we must be careful. In our examples, we take the numbers of the Bundestagswahl carefully to determine who's voting for whom. But then, let's see the occupation of voters by party. And here we can see at least the Linke is mostly being voted by or elected by unemployed people, followed by the SPD, or most likely followed by the SPD, and then the AFD. Well, fewest unemployed voters has at the moment the BSW, but this is because, as I already mentioned before, that you don't have unemployed voter numbers on state level, and we had state level elections, we had European elections, it's the same, and we will see whom unemployed voters voted for after the federal election. But let's look at retirees. So, as I already said, the CDU-CSU, well, they have the reputation to be an old party, and you can see here that all 30% of the voters of the CDU and CSU, or the Union, are retirees. It's likely to what you see with the SPD, same with the BSW, and in comparison, the strongest contrast is are the other parties, except from the Linke, which has a higher value, but the FDP, the Greens, or Grüne, and the AFD don't have many retired voters. But if you remember what I said about the FDP and the self-employment, then you can see that there's indeed a high value of self-employed voters for the FDP. It goes from 45 to over 40%, so almost 40% of the voters of the FDP are self-employed. And in comparison, the AFD is a Workers' Party, as I already highlighted. And here you can see it's from around, well, 8% to 45%. So around 38%, 37%, let's say at least over 35% of the voters of the AFD are workers. And this makes it indeed a threat to the original Workers' Party, the SPD, and the Linke. It's likely that the Linke lost voters to the AFD and also what you can see here to BSW. BSW also has a high number of voting workers and also employees. Employees are more relevant to the Greens. And so, yeah, this is who is voting for whom. But again, the BSW is relatively new, and the voting system in Germany is complicated. And there are not many organized data sets, unlike what we had in the US presidential election or, for example, in France. And so there are also fewer polls on state and federal level. This means that we need to look how we build a reliable model to predict or at least to see tendencies in the election. Again, this is me, Christian Crump. I'm a dropout at Georgia Institute of Technology, where I studied analytics in a master's program. I got my executive master of business administration from Quantic School of Business and Technology in Washington, D.C. I also studied social science at Bielefeld University in Germany, and I have several certificates from the Corporate Finance Institute. So, thank you for watching. Happy holidays. We will be back either next week or in the new year. Thank you very much.